Forbes Books presents Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow. Transformation for a new and better world. Here's David.
Ushering in football preseason, you're in for a special treat today. My guest this week is an extraordinary self-made leader that has served as both a college football head coach and a major blue-chip financial industry executive. 2 blockbuster successful careers in one lifetime. He's the former chairman and CEO of TD Ameritrade and the former head football coach at Coastal Carolina. He's now Coastal Carolina's chair of athletics, executive director for football, and named gifter for the Joe Moglia Center for Sports and Academics at Coastal Carolina. He's also the author of several books, and he's founder of the BAM Culture Principles that transcends both sports and business. Coach Joe Moglia, welcome to the podcast.
David, I'm happy to be on.
Let's go way back. Because on the surface, for those that don't know your background, it would seem odd that you had a lot of experience coaching football before getting into finance. You walked away from a football career and ended up on Wall Street working at Merrill Lynch for 17 years before becoming the CEO of TD Ameritrade in 2001. Can you take us back to when you made that choice and what it was like to enter the business world?
Well, I think probably, David, makes sense to share a little bit how I got involved with coaching to begin with. You know, I grew up in a gang area in the Dyckman Street area of New York City, and my dad was an Italian immigrant, and he never finished 8th grade. My mom was an Irish immigrant. She never finished 10th grade, and I was the oldest of 5. So 7 of us lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment in the Dyckman Street section of New York. And I mentioned it was a gang area. 2 of my best friends, I was part of that. 2 of my very best friends were killed in high school when I was a sophomore. One died of a drug overdose. The other was killed by the police robbing a liquor store. Had I not been playing high school football, I would have been with a guy robbing the liquor store. And that kind of woke me up a little bit, and it got me a little bit more focused. Now, my goal was to play football and baseball in college, but instead I became a father. So my dad had a fruit store, and his suggestion was, now that I have significant responsibility, don't go to college, work with me full-time in the store. And I really felt that college was something that I needed to do. He reminded me we had no money. I said, I'd figure that out. So I wound up going to Fordham in the Bronx, Fordham University. And I supported my wife and my daughter, paid every nickel of my education. I drove a yellow cab in New York City, a truck for the post office, and worked at my father's fruit store. Now, that wasn't the most fun a freshman ever had. So what was missing in my life for the first time was sports. Now, I went to Fordham Prep, which is on the Fordham University campus, and I had a good career there. And my sophomore year, they offered me a coaching job. So I coached ball during the season, and I worked at my father's store in the off season. I majored in economics and thought I wanted to go to Wall Street. But by the time I finished my 3rd year coaching as a senior, I really, really loved what I was doing. And I thought that if I could potentially become a head high school coach, I'd want to pursue a career in coaching. If not, I'd try to go to Wall Street. So I probably applied 100 schools, and at 22, I became the youngest head high school coach in the history state of Delaware at Archmere Academy. Now, I mention that specifically because that's where Joe Biden went, and he played football there. And so I wind up coaching the first time for 16 years. You fast forward a little bit, and it's year 13 for me. It's 1981. It's my first year as defensive coordinator at Dartmouth. Now, we're living in Hanover, New Hampshire, but now I have 4 kids. And we're in the middle of a staff meeting, and the sheriff from town comes in and he needs to see me. And I thought there was an accident in the family, and he says, Coach, I'm really sorry. He hands me divorce papers. So I couldn't afford to live independently and support my wife and 4 children, so I got permission to move into a storage room above the football offices. I didn't mind that, but it had no heat. And this is New Hampshire, and the average temperature in the wintertime is probably 7 or 8 degrees, and I could see my breath for about 4 or 5 months a year. Well, I lived there for 2 years. Now, fast forward to January 1984. Miami upsets Nebraska for the national championship. Miami was the team in the 80s, and my goal was ultimately to be a head coach at a major school. Bottom line is they offered me the job to go there as a secondary coach with the understanding I would take over for the defensive coordinator, Tom Alvadati, who was ultimately going to go to the Cleveland Browns. Now, I could not have a better possible job, a better possible opportunity in terms of what my career plans were. but I'm going to live in Coral Gables, Florida. My kids are still going to live in New Hampshire. Coaches work 7 days a week, 80 hours a week. We don't get a day off during the season. Back then, we didn't make much money. So for me, it was, I can't fly the kids back and forth. And I turned down the job because I didn't think I could do my job as a coach if I couldn't live up to my responsibility as a father. That was in over 5 decades in either the business world or in the coaching world. That's probably the toughest decision I ever made because it meant I had to get out of coaching. But I always did have this very real interest in Wall Street. And I coached at Lafayette. I went to Fordham and I coached at Dartmouth. So I did everything I could to reach out to people that had connections there that were Wall Street related. And there was no social media then. And I just kind of kept one phone call after another. And eventually, Merrill Lynch gave me a shot in their institutional MBA training program. There were 26 of us in that program, 25 MBAs from Harvard, Stanford, et cetera, and 1 football coach. And everybody said, this football guy's never going to make it here. But I did make it there. And a few years later, those MBAs were working for me. That's how I literally wound up on Wall Street.
Fast forward here, as CEO of TD Ameritrade, to pursue your dreams of being a head football coach, both the business world and the sports world, thought you may be, missing something upstairs. But somehow you pulled it off. Can you take me back to 2012 and take our listeners back and what inspired you to make that decision?
Yes. So I began at Ameritrade in 2001. And if you recall, that's when the dot-com bubble had burst. So between March 2000 and March 2003, we had a very significant recession. And a lot of the dot-com companies were in trouble. Ameritrade was going out of business. But I did decide to take the job, and I moved from New York City to Omaha, Nebraska, where we're headquartered. Bottom line is, by the time I stepped down as CEO and became chairman at the beginning of 2009. In my last 5 years, we had a 500% return to our shareholders, which literally outperformed any financial firm in the globe. And during 2000, this was also the financial crisis. So what everybody did wrong in that 2007, 2008 period, we didn't do any of that. So when we stepped down, I couldn't have been prouder of what we were able to accomplish. And if you think about it, if we had been a college football team, it would have been like we won 2 or 3 BCS championships in a row, but not Alabama winning those. It would have been like Vanderbilt winning those. And as you can imagine, somebody that would win those, win a couple of championships from Vanderbilt could probably get any job they want to. At that moment in time, I was never more in demand in my life. And there were many, many things going on. And I got a call, but I didn't want to do anything right away because I've been working hard since I was a kid. And I got a call from a group of alumni at Yale telling me that job might be opening and would I be interested. I was kind of dumbfounded. I said, guys, I haven't coached for 24 years. They said, we know that, but we looked at the skill sets that head coaches should have. And we not only think you have those, but we think, frankly, you have many competitive advantages that the typical head coach is not going to have. So please think about it. Bottom line, I did. And I spent about 6 months going through that process. And at a time in my life where I could have done anything that I wanted, probably the most difficult thing I could choose to do in terms of people welcoming me was going back to football. But at that point, for me to do something that I knew I was good at, knew I was passionate about, and where I could really, really have an impact on kids, I didn't think I could do anything better with my life at that moment in time than that. So that's how I decided to go back. But in 2009 and 2010, I was on the staff in Nebraska. Then in 2011, I became a head coach of the Omaha Nighthawks of the United Football League. We competed against people like Jimmy Fossil from the Giants and Denny Green from the Vikings, and Marty Schottenheimer, who was the 5th winningest coach in the NFL at the time, Jerry Glanville, et cetera. But the league was very poorly run, and we wanted to run it going out of business. And we only played 4 games that year, and that was it. Now, Dave DeCenzo was the president of Coastal Carolina. He had been following my career. I had been getting some notoriety for this because I was so different from what any other coach might be. He had reached out and he said ultimately that it's not going to be easy for a college president to give you a job. He goes, but someone will. And before somebody does that, I want to be the guy to do that. And then he offered me the job at Coastal Carolina. So that I had already been back in coaching for 3 years when I was offered that job. And I couldn't be more excited about being able to take it. And that's all worked out pretty well.
Coach Moglia, I'm going to do something unique today so the listening audience can clearly understand the key important drivers in college sports with the understanding that we are discussing both have skills and knowledge on coaching and playing football and accelerating business. Please let me know and explain the importance and differences between these key deliverables. And I appreciate it if you're candid and share similarities as you see it. The first one being delivering a great value proposition in both sports and business. What do you see?
I think sometimes in both sports and business, the leaders lose their way a little bit. And the business world is literally all about your clients. Without them, you don't have a business. And you have to be able to have a return for your shareholders. If you don't have a return, you're not profitable. Eventually, you're going to go out of business. And you got to realize that that value is delivered through your employees or through your associates, or through your people. And so they're your priorities: your clients, your shareholders, and your employees. Now you look at athletics, it's really the same thing. You got to be able to take care of, i.e., your fans, because they're really your clients, and you have to do that through your associates or people which are your players and your coaches. And in order to do that, you have to have profitability in terms of the season, i.e., you got to win. And in order to be able to stay involved, keep your job, etc. So you have to be able to do both to be effective. Now, what's different about the business world versus the world of sports is the product itself. Business and football are different. But the leadership skills one needs to be able to run a business, or the leadership skills one needs to be able to run a football program, are identical. It's about leadership. It's not so much about the product. So it's about have a very, very clear understanding about what you're trying to accomplish. Being very, very clear in terms of having a well thought out strategy that can handle different contingencies as they pop up down the road, but the wisdom to recognize you have to keep those simple enough so you can actually execute. You have to have a pretty good understanding of people. You have to hire well. You have to know how to delegate. The leadership principle that I've always believed in was very, very simple. You stand on your own 2 feet. You take responsibility for yourself. You treat others with dignity and respect, and you live with the consequences of your actions. Now, I wrote that in that first job that I had at Archmere Academy, when I was 22 years old. I wrote that in that playbook when I was 22 years old. That has been my steadfast leadership philosophy through my entire coaching career, first time around, that's the standard I've had through the entire business world. And that's been the foundation upon which we built the Coastal Carolina football program. So you stand on your feet, standing on your own 2 feet, you take responsibility for yourself, treat others with dignity and respect, and you live with the consequences of your actions. And one last thing I would add too is I said, what's your mission? In the business world, people say, we want to be the investment firm of choice, or we want to be, such and such. We want to be number one in terms of what we do. And ours was a little different than that. At Ameritrade, our mission was to bring financial literacy to every family in this country. So it wasn't about us, it was about our clients, and it was also aspirational. So our employees took a lot of pride in something like that. At Coastal Carolina, it wasn't so much about winning. It wasn't about winning championships. It wasn't about going to playoffs. It was about, we want to put a team on the field that Coastal Carolina is proud of. So again, it wasn't about us, it was about our school. Now, we got to win. If we don't win, I'm going to get fired. But that attitude means anytime we're on the field, we want to make our university proud, and the people associated with it proud. And you're never going to see us take a snap off. You're going to see us give it 100% of the time. That's what our belief and our mission is. So there are all the things that are comparable. Now, the next thing is comparable. Obviously, you have to deliver. And if you don't deliver in either world, eventually you're not going to have a job.
Effective pitching ideas and motivations, and also comments on money. You spoke a little bit earlier during rough situations. You were helpful. In the last 4 months, feel a little bit more like a bear losing season unless you have the virtuous patience to get through your tech stocks. But getting back to that, the number one thing is, how do you effectively pitch and motivate?
I think the bottom line is, I think there's really a balance. I think too often, let's say as a coach, the same thing in the business world, because again, you're talking about how do you motivate people? How do you get people kind of on the same page and moving in the same direction? Well, I think too often, let's say using football as an analogy, the coach says it's all about the team. You totally sacrifice yourself for the betterment of the team. And I've never really believed that. So when I began as a bond salesman, a lot of the bond salesmen think it's about the client. We got to make sure we do a lot of business with the client. But in the bond world, our trading desk also takes a lot of risk. So it's about balancing the needs of our desk, the needs of our firm, with the needs of the client. and you want to make both of those fit together. I think it's the exact same thing with regard to coaching, in the sense that I want my players to understand that our objective is to do well. Our objective is to go through a process where we're going to do everything we can to eliminate mistakes. We're going to function as a unit. We're going to come together as a team, and we're going to have success doing that. But in doing that, we want you to be successful too. So if we had a kid, for example, that we needed to play, I'm making this up, linebacker, and he really, really didn't have his heart in it, I'd like to be able to put him in a position where he would be better able to be more effective and be happier, and we increase the probability that he can maximize his potential. And I think too often, so the bottom line, what we're doing is balancing what's in the best interest of the player with what's in the best interest of the team, and do the same thing in the business world. I think that's what some people are missing, the balance of those two.
Related to that is recruiting and maintaining great talent and dealing with people. What's your secret in both worlds?
Well, I think I go back to the standard. So football, for example, literally we were the only team in the country that had no rules. There was no other team in the country that operated that way. But we had a standard. That standard is the definition I just gave you. Stand on your own 2 feet and take responsibility for yourself. Always treat others with dignity and respect. And you live with the consequences of your actions. Now, if you take responsibility for yourself, but you don't live with the consequences of your actions, none of this works. Now remember, this has been my leadership principle for 5 decades in 2 different worlds and in my personal life. So I know that this works. I really do know that it works. In the business world, I would say we can hire almost anybody we want to. Explain to me why we would want to hire you. And I want to see somebody that it gives me an understanding of that. I want to see somebody that can handle themselves, under stress. And I want them then to be able to appreciate and maximize that. What are the skill sets that are required to be good in this particular job? Chief financial officer, a bond salesman, technology person, whatever it might be. In the world of football, what are the skill sets that are required to be part of our program and to be able to play your position effectively? Do you have those skill sets? If you do have those skill sets, and that's what our job is, to evaluate that on film, then there's one other question we've got to ask you. Is this something you'd be really passionate about? Is Coastal Carolina in your best interest? Is working for Merrill Lynch or TD Ameritrade in your best interest? And we try to, again, match that up as best we possibly can. So the key is not just it's not a sales pitch per se. It's developing an understanding that really truly being part of the organization that I'm representing is also in your best interest, and will operate in a way always that'll be a best interest of both the organization and the individual. And that's really the pitch. Now, besides that, what we've done in the business world, whether the different divisions I ran at Merrill Lynch or TD Ameritrade or at Coastal Carolina, you got to be good. We are good at what we do, and we're successful at what we've done. And in the beginning, it's a matter of laying a foundation upon which to build that. So once you start to roll a bit, then people start to come to you a little bit more often.
As we turn to core efficient and improving processes, both in football, athletics, and the business world, Tom Landry versus lean process excellence. One key success factor, both in business and also in sports and football, is maintaining core processes and ensuring that you're able to effectively execute, either when you're on the field or when you're in business, and making sure that the team effectively functions together to maximize core efficiencies.
Number one, I couldn't agree more. I think you mentioned Tom Landry as an example of that, whether in the business world or whether in football. In football, the number one reason why people lose games is because of mistakes. So the objective is really never to win the game. The objective is to follow a set of processes or protocol that's going to increase the probability that we're going to make fewer and fewer mistakes, and therefore increase the probability that we're going to win a game. It'd be the same thing in the business world. You might recall when Jack Welch was at GE, he instituted something called Six Sigma. And what Six Sigma was, it was meant to go through every one of your processes, like from the very, very beginning to the end, and find out what's working. Is it copy what's supposed to, and you eliminate what you don't need. You improve what you do need, and you make it as strong as possible. So in the world of football, we're highly, highly, highly organized. The guys know from the very, very beginning what their schedule is going to look like for the next month. They know what the schedule is going to be from day to day. The coaches wouldn't know the exact same thing. How much time we're going to spend on our offense, on our defense versus our special teams. How much time we're going to spend in strength training. How much time we're going to spend a game plan. How much time we're going to spend in terms of simplifying that game plan so our kids understand it better, so they can execute a little bit better. And what we emphasize is going through that process. And by going through that process, we significantly increase the probability that we're going to be successful.
As we turn to strategy and tactical adjustments, did you have any comments on football, for example, versus the business world in terms of executing your strategy, and all of a sudden you got an injury, or you have the competition comes at you a certain way, or the markets turn a certain way? Do you have any advice on how they can best bob and weave?
The biggest reason that I mentioned before why teams lose a game is because they make too many mistakes. So in effect, you begin with a playbook. And the playbook is supposed to be sophisticated enough to be able to have strategies, or a strategy that can execute and know how to adapt and adjust to different contingencies. But that playbook is too sophisticated on its own. So you need to have the wisdom to be able to simplify what's in the playbook as you start to approach a particular game plan against a particular opponent. And you've got to recognize the talents that you have within the team. So I'll give you an example that actually I'm very, very proud of. Like, one of the things that teams do, they have a first-string quarterback, of course. Okay, and they got a second-string quarterback and third-string quarterback, and they all practice the exact same thing. But the reality is the skill sets of the first-string guy may be different from the skill sets of the second-string guy. So if the first-string guy goes down, why do you want the second-string guy to come in and do the skill sets of the first-string when he's got different skill sets? So in effect, we would have adjustments, and we practice that way. What the first-string guy practices is different from what the second-team guy practices, because we want him, if he goes into the game, to be well prepared and confident that he can execute. So the game plan adjusts, so to speak. You got to be able to simplify it so you can teach it to the kids. Sometimes when we're struggling, you need to understand why you're struggling. If you don't understand why you have a problem, you can't adjust or adapt to it. So first thing has got to be simple enough where the kids can understand it, where they can easily explain it back to you. And if they're making a mistake, they should be able to look at film and explain what their mistake was, so they can start to adapt and adjust on the run. When you put together your game plan, you put together with that understanding that you just quarterback example, where you may have an individual go down, and you got to adapt and adjust to that. And you already have a game plan that's geared for a particular team and their strengths and weaknesses. And therefore, if there's an adjustment that they've made, or something's happening that's not going as well as it should, because you prepared for this and you thought about it, your ability to adjust becomes that much more simpler and that much more automatic. But that's because that's the way you thought all year long. That's the way you thought when you were putting together the playbook. That's the way you thought in the spring. That's so critical decisions that you've got to make. We talk about in May. So what would happen if we were to face this? What would happen if we face this? Critical decisions in terms of 2-point plays. We're going to fake a punt. We're going to fake a field goal. When we want an all-out blitz, when we don't. When we want to be much more conservative, when we don't. That's all discussed and determined in May. We do it again in preseason. And then a game plan, we spend a little time knowing, just reviewing exactly what we're going to do. But when that time comes during the game and you got 30 seconds to make a decision, we don't wander, we don't guess, we know exactly what we're going to do. So emotion's not going to take over. And that's the approach we have. And frankly, the exact same approach in the business world.
As you approach team, as you accelerate growth, it's one thing to be able to manage people. The other thing is to manage great coaches and pick great coaches in order to manage. Do you want to comment at all the importance with regard to choosing leadership within your leadership and how you do that, including assistant coaches, assistants, players, what have you, in order to accelerate growth to really unprecedented levels?
I think the number one thing that any leader has to do is make sure he's got the right people, or she has the right people in place to be able to lead. Number one thing you have to do. What happens too often, we look to search firms to be able to help us, bring in candidates, etc. So if we look at football as an example, I want to be able to, I want to know and understand how the individual coaches. I actually want to look at his film. And if I see people loafing in the film, I don't care how smart he is, I don't care how successful he's been, that's not somebody that I'm going to want. So somebody that I think really understands his part of the game. And I look at film and I can see whether or not the kids understand it and whether or not the kids have a real strong work ethic. So that's number one. Number two, I want to make sure he can communicate, or she communicate clearly, because it's his or her. Remember, take responsibility for yourself. It's your responsibility that the individual understands what's going on. And so I want to make sure they understand that. And then thirdly, I want to make sure, frankly, that they can handle themselves under stress. There are a lot of good talent out there that can fill leadership positions. And some of them look good, some of them sound good, some of them have great resumes. They're great on the board, they're good in the boardroom. But at the end of the day, they're not what they should be when things are blowing up on the field, or you got multiple injuries, or you have a really, really horrible earnings quarter. And so how you handle yourself under stress. And then lastly, this leadership philosophy that I mentioned, Dave, is the basis upon which I build everything. So I want to make sure that individual understands that they're coming into an organization that is built on a principle that really expects you to take responsibility. There are no excuses. We always expect you to treat us with dignity and respect. And depending on what you do and how you do it, there'll be consequences of those actions. Hopefully, most of the time, those consequences are going to be positive. But if we're not doing what we need to do, I'll make a tough decision on that. And sometimes the consequences certainly can be negative. But that'd be the four things that I would do. To summarize quickly, one, do you really understand your craft and understand what you're doing? And that's demonstrated by the end result. Good execution, kids not making mistakes. Secondly, your ability to be able to communicate and communicate well and understand it's your responsibility to be able to do that. Thirdly, the ability to be able to handle yourself under stress is absolutely critical. So you separate yourself from everybody else. But the fourth one is a standard of leadership that I will hold you to, and I expect you to embrace. And the same thing would be true for the entire organization.
So in essence, the way you go at things is your attitude, the alignment, your assignment, but you're heavily weighing someone's attitude and someone's to buy in to what you see as important as the first thing. And how would you weight that in terms of, I don't want to get you down to percentages, but you seem to be leaning towards the attitude and someone to buy in to your core beliefs as being far outweighing skills and knowledge. Is that fair?
Yes. So when I began at Coastal, I began by saying there are going to be two things that we do that no one in the nation is going to do. First, we're not going to have any rules, but we're going to have this standard, the one that I've been talking about. Secondly, we're actually going to give up practice. I repeat that. We're going to give up practice 30 minutes a week to focus on things that have nothing to do with football, but have everything to do with what's going on in the world. We'll talk about terrorism. My guys know what ISIS stands for. Most students in the country, I don't care where they're from, Harvard, Notre Dame, they don't know what ISIS stands for. My guys understand that. They understand the role of the military. They understand the role of politics. They understand the role of capitalism. Those are different things we spend a lot of time talking about. So you go back to, if they're the two things that separate us, and we begin with a standard. Now, by the way, I call that standard, I have about 120 male players, and I got another 25 male coaches, interns, analysts. So we call that BAM, be a man. We got BAM on the back of the jerseys, BAM's all over the locker, BAM's in the stadium. Now, that's not sexist. That philosophy is the same one I used to raise my three daughters. It's the same standard I had in the business world, regardless of whether you're female or male. It's really an acronym for leadership. So BAM, that's what that means to us. Now, when I recruit players, I make that very clear. I said, you're coming here with the understanding that if you're not able to play, and we did a crappy job evaluating you as an athlete, that's on us. But you're coming here with the understanding that this is the one standard we have that doesn't get violated. And if you don't live up to that, there's a good chance you're not going to be with the program. Now, same thing with the coaches. Now, here's what usually happens. Everybody says, oh, that's great. That sounds great. Oh, yeah, I buy into that. But they don't really understand it until they really start to live it. And there's too often where we start to make excuses. And I give you many examples of this, where people automatically say, well, you know what, a player. Well, I'm going through a problem. My teachers don't like me. I'm not playing enough because my coach doesn't like me. My parents don't understand me. I'm having a problem with my girlfriend. It's too hot. It's too cold. Whatever it is, that's an excuse. The Federal Reserve is tightening too quickly. That's not helping us. We have too many people that have the foreign exchange rate is impacting our business from an international perspective. These are one excuse after another. They're not tolerated. then they're not accepted. And again, that's all reviewed in the very, very beginning. So once you're with me and you committed to this standard, then I expect you to live up to it. And the way I can tell whether or not you're doing that is by our results, by your results, by the impact you have on your players, to be able to do the different things that we just talked about. Really understand and know what your job is, and in terms of what you're trying to teach, what you're trying to approach, your ability to communicate, ability to be able to handle yourself under stress, your ability to live up to this standard. And in doing that, and I delegate incredibly well, I think, we get far greater results and far greater achievements in terms of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish than what I believe we would normally would. Now, that also means when people don't do what they need to do, then if they don't change and adapt and adjust, I have to make a tough decision on them. I'll give you one quick example in terms of players. When I first got to Coastal Carolina, they were having a lot of troubles, and they hadn't done particularly well. I inherited 71 guys from the previous team, and I explained the standard to BAM. This is what we're going to be doing. And I had done my homework, and there were 25 of the 71 guys that would have been having trouble with me if they had been part of the program in the past. And I said, well, you've got a new guy coming in. I also know that you've not been able to live up to this type of standard. So I'm making it very clear, if you don't live up to the standard, it's going to be an issue. So within the next year, of those 25 guys, I let 14 of them go, and 11 of them were starters. That also made it very clear to the other people we're laying a foundation upon which to build, and we wanted winning the championship that first year, and going to the playoffs and winning in the playoffs. And from there, we just built and got better and better from there. But that's the same standard, so I'm not fooling around with that. So what kind of weight would I put on it? Use an athlete example. If you can't play, if you can't help us compete, we can't even recruit you. So we're assuming you can play. So if the players that can play, the number one thing they're going to have to live up to is BAM. If they can't, we're not going to recruit them. And if they don't live up to it after they're committed to it, or if you're a coach and you don't live up to it after you're committed to it and you're there, you're no longer going to be with the program. And everybody that's part of the program knows that and understands that.
Thanks for that, Joe. That really ties into your company and team culture as well. All right, Coach, we've reached halftime of our talk. But coming up in the second part of my conversation with Coach Joe Moglia, Joe shares his unvarnished opinion of how the NCAA is doing when it comes to allowing college athletes to sell their name, image, and likeness, and much more.
I feel horrible about this because I love college sports. It's been a big part of my life. But the fact that this could happen and the NCAA not be involved at all is a disgrace. Remember, I'm not against the players getting money. I'm against the fact that the leadership was not there to provide the leadership, to provide structure, to provide guidelines, to provide principles, anything. None of that happened.
To connect with David, go to davidradlow.com. David's book set, The Principles of Cartel Disruption and Secret Stories of Leadership, Growth, and Innovation, are available wherever books are sold. This has been Sustainable Leadership and Disruptive Growth with David Radlow, a presentation of Forbes Books.